Okay, so welcome. I got my intro here. Welcome to the Canadian Society of Organic Urban Land Care's national weekly Zoom series called the Year of the Ecological Garden. I'd like to ask everyone to mute their mics at this time, please. We meet every Tuesday. Oh, there's someone. We meet every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, for about 45 minutes to discuss ecological land care to anyone and with anyone wanting to learn and share with us. We can't do this without support, and we gratefully acknowledge the support from Gaia College, the leading school for organic urban land care professional development, and for diploma courses. SOL's membership includes certified and accredited professionals and also welcomes any of the public who wish to support ecological and holistic land care to become members. If you're not a member, please consider joining. Note that organic land care is the only accepted standard in Canada, and the SOL standards, which outlines principles, practices, and products, is available for free on the website organiclandcare.ca. All SOL accredited practitioners follow this guideline, or follow the standard, sorry. Every month we feature a theme that impacts our work, and every week we invite expert guests to talk about a specific topic and then to open it up to our audience to take questions, which you can do via the chat or asking your question directly. And it would be great to see where everyone's joining us from. So now that we have some people coming in to the room, if everyone could just let us know where you're coming from in the chat, that'd be great. We usually get pretty good spread throughout the country, so it's always fun to see where everyone's coming from. This is also an opportunity to share best practices, which is why we're here, because we can make more of an impact together than we can on our own. So for May, sorry, get ahead of myself. The theme for this month is soil care and composting. This week's guest is Christina Nikolic from Organic Gardeners Pantry in Victoria, BC, who I will introduce to you all here in a second. We record these sessions, and they are available afterwards on the SOL website. And that's also where you can see upcoming monthly themes and weekly guests. So please share this widely with your networks. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, please let us know. And we'll do our best to cover those topics. Now, before I introduce our special guest, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge where I'm coming from. I'm in High River, Alberta, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the first people of Southern Alberta, including the Siksika, Piikani, Kiani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Now, as I said before, our guest today is Christina Nikolic. Christina is originally from Germany, where she received extensive industry training and received a degree in landscape design before moving to Canada. After graduating from Gaia College, Christina became a SOL certified organic land care professional in 2005, and then soon after became an instructor in Gaia College. She teaches a few courses with Gaia College, including the plant knowledge course that I just completed last spring. So thank you for that. I look forward to the next one. And today, Christina is here to talk to us about organic fertilizer options, which is something I'm going to take lots of notes about because I get asked this a lot of questions about fertilizer and options. So without further ado, welcome, Christina, and maybe you can let us know where you're joining us from so that I don't mess up anything.
No problem.
Take away. I'm going to make you host, unless you don't need to share your screen or whatever. And then
I don't have a screen to share.
Okay.
Oh, I just clicked myself away. Hold on.
Well,
Where am I? Oh, here we are. Okay, good.
Okay, well, I'll just keep the host for now, and if you need something to share something or whatever, just let me know and we can switch it over.
Great.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Hello. I work and live and play on the traditional territories of the Westernich and Lekwungen speaking people, otherwise known as the capital of BC, Victoria, and have been making a living selling organic fertilizers for the last 12 and a half years, which has been a wild ride and a lot of work and tons of fun. And I have the best customers, I have to say. We are usually discussing fertilizers from a different angle, and especially when you come from a conventional background. It's funny, conventional wasn't that conventional until the advent of synthetic fertilizers, and that was not so long ago. So now we're slowly going back to what everything should be in terms of best practices and daily practices and organic practices, which is what it has been for thousands of years. So we're coming back to that, and nowadays we have the extra benefit of having the science behind the traditional knowledge, which is fun, a really exciting time to be alive. So I specialize in organic, or at least natural, mined or otherwise produced fertilizers, nothing synthetic, nothing that kills anything. And usually we distinguish between so-called full spectrum fertilizers, where you have a substance that has a whole bunch of different trace elements, microelements in small amounts each, and lots of them, versus the so-called nutrient-specific fertilizers, where you have very few individual nutrients, maybe just 2 or 3, and they occur in larger amounts in these substances. And usually my approach is, in these stages of how you should look after your soil, how you should transition to organic land care, how you should feed the soil and keep the soil ecosystem healthy and happy, so these underground microorganisms can look after your plants. It's about mostly it's about mulch, microbes, and moisture, as we discussed 2 weeks ago. Those are the 3 pillars that everything rests on. Without water, nothing happens. Without organic matter, nothing happens. And without microorganisms, nothing happens. So if you have these 3 in place, the next step, at least in my experience so far, and we keep learning, is to employ the full spectrum fertilizers first, and not, in conventional knowledge, you're taught to do a soil test and do a pH test and then start tinkling with all the chemistry. And that is not usually necessary and often harmful. And usually we don't even know exactly what we're doing. Because we don't know exactly what we're doing, we should probably stick with stuff that can't hurt anything first, and go with something that is a slow food, a whole food, something that feeds the microbes first, who then feed the plants. So let's just launch a few products. Generally, we distinguish between organic, as in has been a plant or an animal, or mineral or natural, as in it's coming from the earth, it's been a rock, or it's been a kind of earth. On the organic side, my absolute favorite right here is liquid kelp, or basically anything made from seaweed, which is fantastic because it has a host of trace elements from the ocean, as well as, very gentle NPK values, nothing big at all. But it has these all-important plant growth hormones, the auxins and cytokinins, which help plant growth, both the roots and the shoots and everything that is actually guided by growth hormones in the plants. Seaweed contains that, and it is my #1 go-to full spectrum fertilizer. Anytime you propagate, anytime you want to start seeds or plant out your seedlings or divide something or pot it up or start a nursery, don't forget the kelp. Kelp is probably the most important. Can you use kelp fresh from the beach is the question I often get, and the answer is yes. If the ocean water where you get it from is clean, you don't even have to rinse that ocean water off, because as we can see in my next sample, another one of my absolute go-to products is ocean water. And you might ask, ocean water? And yes, ocean water, because ocean water contains all those 80+ different elements that have been floating around in the rivers, on the earth, have been washed into the ocean ever since oceans came into being. So there's 80 or so different elements in here. This particular product has the sodium chloride taken out, so not to overload the soil with salt. But I have been talking to others who are saying this is actually not a problem in healthy soils. The seawater, including the salt, would be okay. I'm going to look further into that. I think we're not yet done learning about all the benefits of that. But it's one thing is clear, this unassuming clear liquid it weighs actually 1.15 kilograms per liter. So it's heavier than fresh water because it's got all these dissolved minerals in it. Fantastic for feeding the minerals to the plants via the soil ecosystem. And again, I would use this anytime you're into flowering, you want to have good fruit, you want to have good seed development, viable seeds for the next crop. That's when the ocean water comes in. It doesn't have to be applied very often. Neither the kelp nor the seawater have to be done more than monthly. The kelp maybe once a month, the seawater maybe only 3 times per growing season. Super stuff. And again, small amounts of a huge variety of different nutrients, and you can't overdo any one thing. This is the nice thing. It's not gonna burn anything or pollute anything or run off and create a problem elsewhere. In the category of the nutrient, blank, the full spectrum fertilizers. Another one I want to run by you is a recent addition to my business and to the shelves on many garden centers indeed, that is called fly frass. And frass is basically the poop of fly larvae. So this fertilizer is not actually made from flies or their larvae, but it's made after the animals have been harvested, processed into animal feed usually. This is what they leave behind. These fly larvae, it's black soldier fly. It's a very benign, non-problematic species of fly that occurs all around the world. The adults are only here on Earth for 7 to 11 days. They live, they find a mate, they lay eggs, and then they die. They don't eat in that time frame. They don't have a stinger. They don't have a mouth part. They're just there to make sure the next generation of flies gets born. And then where the real action happens is with the larvae. When the larvae go through all their stages, they shed their skins a few times, they go to an enormous amount of food, and they leave behind their manure. And you would think, okay, one little fly larva, how much could it be? But if you have millions of them, it adds up, and it gets collected and dried and ground into this brown, sort of sweetish smelling substance. And it's great for sprinkling on your seedlings, to add to your potting mix. It's really good in containers. You can also sprinkle it on lawns. It's not as cheap perhaps as maybe some of the fish fertilizers out there, but it is more sustainable, and you don't need to do it more as often. So to my mind, it makes sense to give it a try. So it's called Fly Frass, F-R-A-S-S. And again, it has very gentle NPK. This stuff has probably 313 in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but that's not why we use it. We also use it for all the trace elements in there. In that category of broad spectrum or full spectrum fertilizers, there could be things like manure or composted manure. There could be things like cover crops, which is an interesting way of replenishing the soil by growing a plant whose bodies will be returned to the soil to feed the soil directly by decomposing and feeding the microbes. And also things like seed meals, alfalfa seeds, for example, or even flaxseed makes for a good, albeit pricey, full spectrum fertilizer that has been a plant or an animal. So yeah, manure, cover crops, seed meals, kelp products, ocean mineral products. Probably one more that I should definitely talk about is glacial rock dust. I have a little bit of glacial rock dust in a little jar here. I'm not going to open the jar over my laptop, but you can probably tell it's like flour. It's really, really finely ground stone rock. And this rock has been ground down by a glacier, so it contains a host of different mineral elements. This time, the only difference is really, it's not from the ocean, it's not from kelp, it's not from an animal, but it's just what a glacier left behind as it retreated and melted. So this is actually ground up, dug up and ground up and put into bags right here in BC. And it's plentiful and fairly inexpensive. And I would highly recommend it to replenish, remineralize the soil on an ongoing basis with a huge variety of nutrients in small amounts. I should mention fish while we're at it, because fish is deservedly one of the favorite fertilizers of many, and tomatoes absolutely adore liquid fish. I have it, of course. It is 230 in terms of NPK. So it's, it's up there with the fly Frass. It's not hugely harsh on the soil environment at all. When you compare to something like 20, that's insane numbers. They don't occur in nature. They're always synthetic, and they will negatively affect soil life and also negatively affect plants. With something natural such as fish, you can't go wrong in that respect. It is kind of in between things. It has trace elements, but it also has a decent amount of NPK. So fish is always very concentrated, always needs to be diluted with water. And the only place I would probably not use it is as a foliar spray on my lettuce, because there might just be the slightest lingering touch of fish smell on your lettuce. Otherwise, it's totally safe and good to use. I am watching what's happening in the oceans around the world, and fish stocks generally are not looking great. It is time that we start looking for alternatives. Don't get me wrong, fish is wonderful as a fertilizer, and I want to sell it, but also I want to not sell stuff that depletes an ecosystem beyond the point of repair. So I'm looking at what's happening with fish, and I'm increasingly interested in alternatives such as a fly Frass, or such as this stuff that is made from soybeans. Soybeans, of course, as a vegetarian, everybody knows your protein is in soybeans, tofu, and so forth. And this here is also made from soybeans, and it contains 5% organic water-soluble nitrogen. I just got this, and I don't have the label on it yet, but I will have it in the pantry in early June as a veganic alternative to things like Frass or fish. So there's different things out there. This one I'm excited about. I don't know if it's going to replace the fish, but I think it's going to be an alternative to people who are interested in that. I would call that nutrient specific, 5% nitrogen, and not a whole lot of other things, but really, really useful for that time in spring and early summer when there's cell elongation and stem growth and biomass and leaf development. That's what the fish, what the fish and the soybean stuff is good for. Maybe as a addendum, moving away from the full spectrum fertilizers towards the nutrient specific fertilizers, in terms of what there is out there for things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. There's limestone, crushed limestone for calcium. Also, some of it has a lot of magnesium in it. And there is rock phosphate, usually looks like this. It's kind of a dark granular stuff. Careful with these, they contain only 1 or 2 elements in huge amounts. So this is not something that typically happens in nature, to have this much phosphorus all at once or this much calcium all at once. And if you've taken a Gaia College course, you will probably know that there are certain problems when nutrients in the soil get imbalanced from what our crops really want. As a result, we sometimes get, an abundance of plants we haven't really planned for having, so lots of weeds that are there to deal with these imbalanced soils. And there's really a lot of finesse in correcting these, which is why it's so important to think small scale first, and to not go and take the pH test and start messing with calcium or some kind of acid to manipulate pH, or to apply a whole bunch of one thing such as calcium and lime all at once. Usually, there could be instances where there are marked deficiencies in your plants where you need a bit more calcium, a little more of extra of anything, but that would be determined by a soil test that you can't really see in the soil. You can see it indirectly if your plants give you signs of either deficiency or oversupply. A little too long to get into that today. Just to say that these 2 things, the calcium carbonate lime and the rock phosphate, would be 2 nutrient specific fertilizers that are allowed under organic standards, that are not made from plants or animals, that are ground off out of the earth. And the organic side of nutrient specific fertilizers would probably all more or less be animal derived. That could be blood meal, hoof and horn meal, bone meal, fish bone meal, feather meal, these kinds of things. Animal skins, animal bones, everything is made from a lot of nitrogen, a lot of protein containing nitrogen. So these things, these substances ground down, put into bags, applied to the soil also work. I don't deal with a lot of those. There's the yuck factor, and also they're pretty cheap and pretty heavy, so it doesn't make sense for me to ship them. But I want to mention them as possibilities when you're looking for natural organic fertilizers that are not going to upset the soil ecosystem as much as anything synthetic. So you have the choice of animal-derived high nitrogen fertilizers, high phosphorus fertilizers. You could also go milder with manures, with cover crops, with seed meals. And the safest way to start out with would be to go for broad spectrum, go for the liquid kelp, go for ocean minerals, go for glacial rock dust. Start there, see if your plants do well. And if they do, bravo, well done, keep it up, keep the organic matter going. If you still encounter a lot of problems with plant, so-called pests and diseases like plant predators, or obvious signs of deficiencies or oversupplies of something, then it is time to test that soil. Keeping in mind, it's just a snapshot. It's not going to be the same test, the same results every time you do it. And then gently introduce some of the nutrient-specific fertilizers, a small amount at a time. More frequently is better than all at once, and see what happens. All right. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself just in case.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. That's a lot of great information there. I have many questions that I could ask you, but there's one here from the chat from Wendy, who asked about volume. Could the volume be increased or what's the, do you have ratios or anything that,
like application rates for the fertilizers?
Yeah, that came up when you were talking. I think you were talking about the liquid kelp and that kind of thing.
Good question. Yes, the liquid kelp is fantastically effective at small amounts. You only need a teaspoon of this in 1 liter of water for for about 250 square feet. So the application rate is 20 mils per 1,000 square feet. So a tablespoon and a bit for 100 by 10 feet bed.
Okay.
And that's enough. And you could use that every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, but monthly is typically what we do. The sea minerals, a little bit more. Actually, you could go a lot more. You could go to 150 or so, 200 milliliters per 1,000 square feet. Okay. But it also needs to be diluted quite a bit. And because it wants to be diluted at least 1 to 50, that's a lot of water. So use a little less, do it a little more often. That makes more sense. Although I did say before that you only need to do the 3 or 4 times a week, a month. No, a year. Jeez.
Yeah, it's all right.
3 or 4 times a year. Growing season anyway. It's fine to combine it with other things. You could mine this with liquid kelp. You could use it on your own. You could spray it. I think that's the important part. A lot of these liquid, broad spectrum, concentrated fertilizers must be diluted with water and then can be sprayed on plant foliage, which is not something you can do with rock dust or compost. You make compost tea, but you could put rock dust into water too. But these are totally dissolvable. They dissolve in the water, and then you can spray them out. And the great thing about spraying foliage is you need less. So at that point, you can suddenly reduce this to 1 to 100 dilution rate, and using less per 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, I've got this year. I've started adding the fish and the kelp to my compost tea. Yeah, and I noticed that when I first add it, you can really smell the fish. Yeah. But within like the next day, you can really start to smell it less and less, and it starts really smelling good.
It gets eaten. It gets eaten, and the nitrogen gets converted into a form that can be taken up by the plants.
Yeah, which is great because no one likes their compost tea to smell fishy. So.
No, exactly. No. And I have actually stopped using it in making activated EM. Okay. because there's a tiniest little bit of preservative in the fish, otherwise it would just go bad real quickly, and that
Right, okay.
limit the EM in my brews. But I think it's fine in compost tea, especially if you put a little bit of humic acid in with compost tea.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm gonna look into that too. That actually brings me to another question I have. What kind of a wait time, or how fast, like when you start using the organic fertilizers and stuff, do you know, like how long does it usually take the plant to like show, that the improvement, would you say?
Could be within a few days, could take a couple of weeks.
Depending on the plant, of course, probably.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on many factors, including temperature and light and water and rain and all that. But if you have the microbes in the soil that are quickly converting things, or if you foliar spray, then you typically get a very fast action.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. What was the other question I had? You sparked a memory of me growing up collecting seaweed, because I'm originally from New Brunswick, so the coast is right there, and we used to collect seaweed for our garden in the spring.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if you have any tips or anything like that for collecting it, or is there do's and don'ts that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think there, I should use due diligence and say comply with your local bylaws, make sure that what you're doing is legal. In Victoria, it is typically okay to gather seaweed from the beach at the high tide line, and to gather it in small amounts. In other words, don't show up with a front end loader, but if a few people come with a few buckets, when all of Willows Beach is green from one end to the other, I don't think it matters to the beach ecosystem as much.
Right.
I would make sure to not go anywhere within an industrial outfall or like a creek that enters that has known pollution loads on it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Other than that, seaweed is quite wonderful. I never bother washing off the seawater, and I mulch with it, but I usually mostly put it into my once a year, 1 cubic yard layer cake of leaves and seaweed and EM and rock dust and some other goodies to make my compost for the compost tea kits that I sell.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. I forgot to mention too, if I may, there's one other form of organic calcium that I forgot to list as one of the nutrient-specific fertilizers, and that's of course eggshells and seafood shells. As long as you can grind them into a powder, it's no good to just break up the shells and streusel them into the garden. They will still be there years after. But if you can either soften them in water and mix them in a blender, or just grind them dry into a powder, that calcium is also quite available, and it is perfectly safe. It has the right ratio of calcium and magnesium.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've tried the oyster crushed oyster shells. Trying to get calcium into the soil, and I have found that they're just crushed, and you in the next year you can still see them. You're like, well, you're not doing anything if you're still here. So that's the trick, is they have to be ground into a dust, I guess.
Yeah, it is a matter of particle size. The smaller they are, the better they get picked up. Whole shells will eventually disappear, but of course we find middens from thousands of years ago, so it is a long process.
Right. And I've noticed that in my workings, that calcium deficiency in the soil is a major source for a lot of the not the weeds that we call weeds anyway. Right. It seems like a lot of them will grow in calcium deficient soils.
Exactly. They show us exactly what's going on. A lot of weeds or unwanted plants show up in soil that are calcium deficient and also phosphorus deficient. Those two seem to be very frequently at the base of problems, and including also a lot of what we call diseases and pests, like plant-eating insects and plant-eating microbes, that also have an easier time when the right amounts of calcium and phosphorus are not in the soil. One thing to do about that is to find soft rock phosphate or hard rock phosphate. The stuff contains both phosphorus and calcium, but it is in a sort of coarse granular form and it will take a lot of time for it to break down. You can get it as a powder and it works faster. Of course, the secret is to have mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, because mycorrhizal fungi are the ones that can liberate phosphorus from rocks and organic matter and bring it to the plant in exchange for sugar.
Right. And I want to say, if I remember correctly, you can obviously correct me here, that is it magnesium and calcium that need to be in balance in the soil?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's important, I guess, to note that it's because your calcium is low. You can't just throw a bunch of calcium on there without thinking about the magnesium ratio too. Is that fair? Or?
That's fair. That is the latest research, and not all lime is created equal. So you can find calcium carbonate, ordinary calcitic lime or agricultural lime, which has a good calcium magnesium ratio of about 8 parts calcium, 1 parts magnesium. Or you can find dolomite lime, which has about only 2 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium, which is a much narrower range and has more magnesium in relation to calcium than most plants want. It is appropriate when there's a known strong deficiency of magnesium, but most of the time it's not, magnesium is not needed as much as dolomite lime offers. So I would try and find, well, maybe get a soil test done for that particular one, but then try and find ordinary marking lime, the stuff that they use in sports fields. That's the right calcium.
Oh, okay, cool. That I have a kind of a question, just a theory I've kind of in my head, and I want to pass it with you because you're here. I have the chance.
Yeah.
So my wife is a nutritionist, a holistic nutritionist, and in our bodies, chlorine will strip calcium from your system.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if everyone is watering with city water, which is full of chlorine, would that be causing possibly some of the calcium deficiencies in urban soils?
You know, that is a really good question, and I don't know, but it makes sense. I would have to study that.
I just wonder if anyone has done, because it's just, like I said, it's just a theory. Like, it just makes sense.
Yeah. That would make sense. I wasn't even aware that happens in people's bodies, so let alone. But I often get the question, so I have treated city water, will this negatively affect my soil life? Because chlorine or chloramine is also not good for soil organisms. And for that reason, it is usually a good idea to try and dechlorinate the water somehow. If you simply have chlorine, it will dissipate when the bucket of water sits outside.
Right.
If you have chloramine, as we do in Victoria, BC, what I heard is that both vitamin C, which is an acid, and also humic acid can neutralize the chloramine. But it doesn't just dissipate into the air like chlorine does.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay, that's something to keep in mind then.
For sure. And I will look into that calcium chlorine thing. That is interesting. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, this is sort of the connections, I guess. You know, what is it that we're just plants with more complex emotions? Is that, that's what Absolutely. We are?
Yeah, you pull on one string here and something over there vibrates.
Right, yeah, exactly. Another question I had for you about the NPK. You mentioned about a lot of this stuff has more smaller amounts in it. And is it more when you're looking for fertilizers and you're looking for NPK? A lot, like you said, a lot of it is like your big numbers that don't happen naturally. So when you're looking for any type of amendment, would you look for smaller amounts and then apply it more, like, apply it 2 or 3 times rather than one big chunk of nitrogen?
In nature, it's typical to have like single-digit percentages. Maybe 10 or 12 at the very most for things like blood meal or urea from like urine or something. But usually, when I say urea, it usually refers to synthetic stuff. And as soon as you get into something insane, such as 45 or something like that, it's definitely going to be wreaking havoc on the soil ecosystem. So yes, small amounts more often. It's like whole food, right? You could eat 3 chocolate bars a day, and you would get your calories, but you wouldn't have your balanced diet. You wouldn't have all the trace elements. You would have much too much simple sugars and fats and stuff that will make your body sick over time. And so in the soil ecosystem, it's kind of similar. There's really nothing that is as rich in such amounts as the synthetic industry is now producing. And in fact, it's better to, trust the small numbers. More is not always better, and just feed it continuously. I heard somewhere in the teachings within the Gaia College material, it said something like plants don't thrive on a yo-yo diet, like a starvation and then excess diet. They want small amounts of as many different nutrients as possible all the time. So to have an even supply is, I think, the key.
Yeah, it's amazing how, because my wife and I, what we do is it's different, but it's amazing how what we need is the same as what the plants need, right?
Yeah, plants are people, right?
Right. And it's sort of like if you look at your garden in that kind of way, it kind of makes sense that you don't want a big chunk of nitrogen. You want little bits all
right,
consistently. So as an example. So
and you want them at the right time of year. So in April, May, June, yes, there's a need for more nitrogen, but it's not year round like that. It's only when plants really need it, and it coincides with the time of highest microbial activity, when the soil warms up, when the moisture comes, when the organic matter is there, so that spike in need can be met by a spike in production. And then as the summer winds down, it winds down again as well.
Right. Yeah. I always find it interesting when I learned it, and hard to explain to people when they talk about their grass more than anything, but their lawns, how the growth cycle goes up and down, and it comes to like the end of that, like, oh, my grass is dying. Like, no, it's just gone dormant because it's hot, and that's what it's supposed to do, and just chill. Right?
And remember to keep watering. Organic lawns are green in the summer, because we want to keep at the very least the crowns alive, so that excuse me, when the rains return or when the summer drought is over, that it can come back green and dense, and not have bare spots where the weeds will come in. This is not the same on the prairies or in the east, but it certainly is the case on the west coast.
Yeah, for sure. We get a lot, we're in kind of I wouldn't call it a drought because that's a bad word, but it's been dry the last few years. So it's getting more and more that, even if you don't water your lawn, it's going to turn brown. But again, that's leave it longer. There's other things you can do, right? But
mowing high, leaving the clippings, and top dressing with compost and all the good things.
Yeah, right.
You guys should be getting these big summer thunderstorms with lots of rain, no?
Well, they keep going around us is the thing. They call for big storms, and then it just sort of sprinkles in the afternoon, and you're like, well, the dark cloud looked nice, but it didn't rain on us, so
didn't really soak in.
Which is really what we need. Let me see, what other, I had another question about, just more of a comment about the fly frass and that aspect. It seemed when you were saying about sprinkling it on your seedlings and that kind of stuff, it's sort of like you're again imitating if the bugs were there, like the natural. If you had a proliferation of natural bugs that would be living and dying, that would be there, right? But we don't have. We're losing those, so now we have an inoculation of bug.
Exactly. The fly frass contains some NPK, some trace elements, also a whole bunch of bacteria, of course, from the gut of the larva. And that's an interesting thing. You should just say that, because I've been wondering about the insects declining in numbers, and the fabulous German saying that says even small livestock will make manure. So it just doesn't have enough of them. And so all the insects that used to fly around the gardens, the cities, the fields, everywhere in huge trillions of numbers, if they're not there anymore, all the droppings, which individually we wouldn't even notice, but I'm sure the soil ecosystems everywhere are noting that there's less stuff raining down. And the same with birds and with wild animals and all of that. And here we go, and we replace it with, our domestic animals and or synthetics, which I'm not sure if this is going to work for very long anymore.
No, it seems like it's sort of like how the urban lot is normally designed to drain water off as quickly as possible, and then we pump water back onto,
Yes.
you know, so we kill out all of our bugs, and then we got to chip in the bug bodies to do it the job. So it doesn't.
It's quite maddening. But you know what the answer is to everything is organic matter.
It is. Yeah.
Organic matter in the soil becomes a sponge. It holds whatever little rain is falling, and then, you know, provides for the bacteria and fungi to eat it and create more organic matter from more mulch. And just keep mulching, grow your cover crops, get your kelp products, whatever shape it may have, and keep your debris on site, you know, chop and drop your flowers, rip and flip your weeds, leave the bodies of the weeds you rip out just at the soil as is on the soil surface to help with the mulch. And try to not import too much outside of course, shopping for some specialty organic fertilizers. Yes. But in general, let's get away from having to shop all the time and bringing stuff into the gardens, and having more of a self-sustaining circle on the property ourselves.
On the property. That's the thing. Yeah. To keep everything on the property as much as possible, right?
Yeah. Compost it, mulch it, sheet mulch with it.
Yeah. Do you recommend, well, you're talking about the liquid fish. We're getting the last little bit here, but I wanted to ask you about the fish, liquid fish, and you mentioned about you know, the fish stocks and that kind of thing that is concerning. Do you know of, you know, one brand? I mean, not to, you know, throw out brands, but to like one brand or whatever that's more ecologically minded. Like, do they collect them off the industry, like the byproduct of the industry, or do you sort of have to do your research to find out where it's come from? Or?
It's really important to do the research, and it's really difficult to do the research. A lot of the time people will not want to tell you where it comes from. So fish could be either wild or farmed, and there's issues with either of those. Or they could be saltwater or freshwater, and there's issues with either of those. So
all of it,
for the most part, what you find in terms of the big, you know, the Alaska, whatever brands, it's probably a mix of wild catches and utilization of, you know, the heads and tails and innards from consumers, from food production.
Yeah, okay.
There are some fisheries for fertilizer specifically. For a while here in BC, it was dogfish. Now the dogfish stocks are, you know, they were once secure, now they're not. Now they're going for other species, and I'm thinking, this should tell us something. I think in the long run, it's either sustainable land-based aquaculture or something other than fish. I think we can, like, you know, we can either have orcas and wild salmon and a functional rainforest, or we can have a deep plundering of the ocean to make fertilizer from. I think it's a pretty easy choice. Yeah. And I could imagine phasing it out. I could imagine keeping it in, but saying, please just use it as foliar spray, small amounts. Don't pour this by the gallon. It's also a matter of how you're using, right? As long as we keep eating fish and raising fish, there will be fish parts we don't consume that can be utilized fine, I think. But it depends on how that fish was grown and where it was caught and all these things. So it's not an easy answer. On the one hand, like I said, I have a business selling it. On the other hand, I'm thinking, let's evolve.
Well, it's like you said, it's a balance, right? So it's as long as you use it responsibly, and that's you know, and as it's supposed to be. So
yeah. Do we have to feed pigs and chickens with fish? I don't really think so.
Yeah. Well, I remember I was in northern BC, Fort St. John, and on the menu was fresh PEI mussels, and I thought, there's no way these mussels are fresh if they're from PEI, and if they are, good my word.
Yeah, I know, that's exactly it, right? Local, small scale, decentralized.
Yeah. Well, the guy I was working with was also at supper, and he said, "You're in Alberta, Nick. Try the beef." So I switched. So, I don't eat a lot of meat, but one of the best pieces I've ever eaten was some Alberta beef. I have to admit it. Well, it's more the local, right? It's so I'm not going to eat fish unless I can smell the ocean, and then in Alberta I'll eat beef, or you know, that kind of stuff.
There's different
freshwater fish too.
Yeah.
So but that's pretty much our time, which is I could sit here and chat with you all afternoon, but
probably.
I'm sure you have other stuff to do. Yeah.
Were there any more questions from anyone in the audience?
No, I don't think so. We just the one actually, and then so I'm sure we'll hold on. It'll be up for anyone to see afterwards, and they can get a hold of you if they have more questions, I guess.
This is going on all year round, every Tuesday?
This is every Tuesday. Yep.
Okay.
So I will just let me see here. I have some closing remarks just for the recording. Next week we are switching topics with a new month and talking about ecological turf care and turf alternatives for the month of June, which is cool. Our guest next week is Seoul's very own Sondora, Alfred Purvis. She's back talking about mowing and foot traffic tolerant native species, and that's hosted by Julia, who I believe hosted you last time you were here, and that should be a super interesting conversation because those two are very, very knowledgeable, so that be an interesting conversation. Be sure to join in for that one. Until then, thank you, Christina, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for joining us also. And Wendy. Oh yeah, that's the question. That was the only question. Sorry. Yes. So yeah, thank you very much, Christina. And like I said, tune in next week, everyone, for a whole new topic.
Thanks. Thank you, Nick. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye now.